And he is an author of several books, including Project-Based Learning for Gifted Students and When Smart Kids Underachieve in School. He's also currently working on a book right now, which is...
It will be out later in the year, so
right.
In the fall, so I haven't finished it yet. So.
Right. Still working on that one.
Yeah.
He spent 18 years in the classroom working with gifted students, and he is currently serving as the gifted coordinator for Pickerington Schools. He is the leader of the Central Ohio Gifted Coordinators Association as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Stanley, and he's going to talk with you tonight about the myth of the gifted child.
Can everyone hear me okay, so I can forego the mic? Okay. So I'm going to present to the room as though it's full, if that's okay with you guys. So, all right, so as Jill so graciously introduced me, I'm the gifted coordinator at Pickerington Local Schools. I've written several books on gifted, but probably the thing that qualifies me most, I think, to talk about what I'm going to talk about today is the fact that my 16-year-old daughter is gifted, and my 10-year-old daughter is gifted. And so, you know, luckily I get to see it from both sides. I get to see from the teacher side, and I get to see the parent side as well. And so, so a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today are things that not only did I see in the classroom, but I see at home as well. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is the myths of gifted. So the first question is, where do these myths of gifted come? Because if those of us who have gifted children, we understand these myths, but there are other people that believe them as though they are sacrosanct. They believe that they are, the truth when, we know different. And so the question is where they come from. So I have a couple of ideas where it may have come from.
Now, I am entitled to part of my father's estate. If you don't want to cut a deal with me, I'll fly him back to Los Angeles, stick him in an institution out there, and we can have a custody battle over him. But Miss, he needs two things. Could you help me give him some food? Thank you very much. Now, you want to battle me in the courts? Think about that. Dr. Burner, think about that. Or we can kind of deal right now. Look, toothpicks. He needs some toothpicks. Can we just get him some toothpicks over here? And I'll see you in court. Let me check it. Sorry about the toothpicks. A2 what? How much is this?
Toothpicks.
So I'm going to check toothpicks. 246, all the change. Frank, how many toothpicks are there?
250.
Pretty close. Come on, let's go right here.
246.
There's 4 left in the box.
So this is a clip from the movie Rain Man. Who here has seen Rain Man? So a few people, yeah. So, you have Raymond who can count toothpicks when they're dropped, or he can count carbs. And so Raymond is obviously very gifted. But he's what we call a 2E, a twice exceptional. He's autistic, and he is gifted as well. But most gifted kids don't have that power that if you drop something, they can tell you how many toothpicks there were. But this kind of perpetuates that myth. And here's another place where it might come from.
Mod X square GX. So please finish Percival for next time. I know many of you have this as undergraduates, but it won't hurt to brush up. Thank you, Stephen. I also put an advanced Fourier system on the main hallway chalkboard. And I'm hoping that one of you might prove it by the end of the semester. And the person to do so would not only be in my good graces, but also go on to fame and fortune by having their accomplishment recorded and the name printed in the auspicious MIT Tech. Former winners include Nobel laureates, Fields Medal winners, renowned astrophysicists, and lowly MIT professors. Well, that's all. If you have any questions, I'm sure that Tom has the answers.
from the movie Good Will Hunting. And in Good Will Hunting, you have Will Hunting, who can solve like really difficult math problems that, you know, a professor at MIT leaves on the board, even though he's a janitor at the college. He's not going to the college. For him, it comes very easy. And so, again, this perpetuates that myth of the extremely gifted person and these superpowers that they have. And it goes a little even further. So I would argue that this series of books and movies are also about gifted children, but in a specific way.
Make it a powerful memory. The happiest you can remember. Allow it to fill you up. Keep trying, James. Good. Your turn now.
Expecto Patronum.
A full-bodied Patronus is the most difficult to produce, but shield forms can also be equally useful against a variety of opponents. Fantastic, Jenny! Just remember, your Patronus can only protect you for as long as you stay focused, so focus, Luna! Think of the happiest thing you can.
Expecto Patronum. I'm trying.
Patronus, good. This is really advanced stuff, guys. You're doing so well.
So, this is a scene from Harry Potter. Harry Potter, who goes to the Hogwarts School of Wizarding, is a gifted school. And so you have these children who have profound gifts, only their gifts has been kind of even accentuated even more into these magical powers that they have. But it definitely perpetuates that myth of the gifted. To give you an idea of how far it's gone, this myth of gifted, this is a show that is currently on Fox right now.
You're still going to the dance tonight? Want me to show you some of my movies?
No, thank you.
Oh my gosh. Hey, look who's here.
Why didn't you tell me?
I'm so sorry.
How do you think we got out of that ship? You do.
Did you hear about the mutant incident? Those are my kids. The X-Men, the Brotherhood, we don't even know if they exist anymore. With the Sentinel services? We have to go. Now.
Look what this is called.
Stay out of sight. There's nothing more important to me than my family.
That was when I ruled the world.
The gifted. So we are taking it so far that we're making these gifted have superhero powers. So what happens is that this myth of the gifted, they don't think that our children who are in their schools have, you know, mystical powers, that they are superheroes, but they do have an unrealistic idea of what gifted kids may be capable of. They think like Raymond and Will Hunting that they can do things that no one else can do, and they certainly can in some regards, but they're also children. And they also, you know, have the needs and wants and that normal children have. So what I'm going to be doing is talking about the myths of gifted, but before I get there, I'm going to talk about the common characteristics. Now, this is different than a myth. So a common characteristics means that a lot of gifted kids display these things, but it's not like they have to go through like a list and check them off to be gifted. So there are some kids that easy to recall facts and mastery of knowledge. There are some kids that are sensitive and intuitive, but there are gifted kids who are not. There are some gifted kids who are perfectionists, but many are not. So these are just characteristics that kind of, that a good amount of gifted students have, but it's not like every single gifted kid has these. And so, similarly, problems faced by gifted. And so these are ones that are characteristics. Characteristics is different than a stereotype or a myth. Because characteristics mean it could be there, it doesn't have to be there. And so these are some of the things that that could be problems. So peer issues, boredom. You know, they're bored in class because they're waiting for people to catch up, which I'll talk about later on. Problem sleeping, and things of that nature. So these are, again, Don't say, oh, I hope my kid's not having all those symptoms. These are not symptoms. These are just characteristics that, researchers have found that, it is common amongst gifted kids, but it's not like every kid has these. All right. So there are many myths that exist about giftedness, and part of the fighting these myths are just being aware of them. And I know that you guys are aware. If you have gifted children, you're already aware of these. But it never hurts to be reminded. I mean, I've been teaching in gifted I taught for 18 years. I've been coordinating for the last 3 years. I have 2 gifted kids at home, and I still need to be reminded of these from time to time. Because sometimes I buy into, even though I know better, sometimes I buy into the myth of the gifted child. And so I'm going to talk about 10 myths that we place upon gifted kids and why they're not necessarily true.
Sometimes I feel stressed about being gifted. Really think that everyone knows what you know. They really don't, because you're working at a faster pace.
Normal kids, but it's harder school. I realize that I can do more than someone.
This is from the mouths of gifted children.
Oh, it can be strange, but it has its advantages. I don't think gifted people are any different from people who don't learn as fast. It's just that we have the capability of learning fast, and that's not a bad thing. I know a lot of information that most other kids don't. We excel in things like math, reading, science, all the basic stuff now.
But it's hard for me to make friends out of school because a lot of people think I'm really brainy.
Honestly, I got trouble in class because I got done on my assignments early and I talked to my friend in class. I wasn't there before.
I maybe read picture books, talk to my friends sometimes.
I got done 10 minutes before everyone else, so I just went outside and extremely bored, and the work there was extremely easy. The math
Be so bored. I'll get done super fast, and I had new stuff that the teachers were teaching us. So I would get in trouble for not paying attention, even though I could do stuff before they explained.
You get to experience how hard and how active you are.
Still doing addition and stuff. I mean, when I came here for second grade, we really getting into multiplication and stuff.
It's just that it has more challenges in studies, and really I try to see if they know as much as me, and I find out that they're still working on stuff I learned in second grade.
So, from the mouths of gifted children and their experiences, and some of these, what they share will show the kind of the myths and how they're not true. And so we're going to talk about this. So the first myth I'm going to talk about is this myth that gifted kids will succeed in life no matter what. And again, you as being parents of gifted kids, I know you don't believe that. But there are people that think that, a gifted child is going to be successful no matter what. If we don't provide them services, they'll be fine. And that is the problem with this. There are those who think that gifted kids don't need a specialized education. One of the principals I work with, she has a fundamental understanding of gifted. She likens it to special ed students. Special education students have very special needs that need to be met in order for them to be successful. Gifted kids are the exact same way. They're just maybe the other end of the spectrum with their needs. So they have certain needs that they need to have in order to be successful in the classroom. And if we're not giving those needs to those, what you hear is like those kids were saying, I was bored. I was getting in trouble because of this and that. So, they're not going to succeed no matter what. Now, some may succeed in spite of their school or in spite of their education. But we want to make sure that we are making sure that they are getting what they need. There's speculation that 10 to 50% of gifted kids are underachievers. So underachievers, the definition of that is simply what you think they can do and what they're actually doing. So what is their potential and what are they actually achieving? And so underachievement can come in many different ways, but how it usually manifests itself as a kid, very bright kid or very gifted kid, is not getting good grades. And why is that? And so that can be a form of underachievement. Thought this one was interesting. Out of high school dropouts, all across the United States, 18 to 25% of them are gifted. So that means 1 out of every 4 high school dropouts is a gifted child. And so no gifted child should be dropping out of high school. Because if they're gifted, they should be able to, that's the rationale, that they should be able to handle that. But that's not necessarily the case. So it's really important that your school system or your school district sees the needs of these kids and tries to meet them as best they can. Now, we can't meet them all, but we can certainly have programs that do help those who we can help. So the second myth I'm going to talk about is the idea of gifted kids loving school and getting high grades because they just love school. So, what I found in my experience in the classroom is that what you teach and what they want to learn can sometimes be 2 very different things. And so, you want to teach this, but they want to learn about this because they're curious about that or whatever. So sometimes those 2 don't meet. So kids, and why this is a myth is, gifted kids love to learn. There's no doubt about that. But sometimes what they want to learn may be something very different than you as their parent want them to learn, or as me as their teacher want them to learn. So they may go, and learn all about something that you think is useless. But for them, it's something they wanted to learn more about. So gifted kids certainly love to learn, but loving school is a whole other matter. And so because they don't necessarily love school, if you have a gifted child who's not willing to play the game of school, they're not willing to sit in the rows and be talked at and be compliant, and they're not willing to do that, then the grades might suffer as a result. Some gifted kids, and these are even more troublesome than the one I talked about where they are underachievers, and their grades are not good. Even more difficult is the kid who does get A's, but they're still not pushing themselves to work to their potential. Because they do know the game of school. They can do just exactly what they need to do to get the grade that they want to get. And they're not going to push themselves any further. And we all know as adults that the way we learn is when we're pushed. And we are, we get to the point where we are being challenged. And so if these kids are not necessarily being challenged, they're getting grades, so you don't identify them as underachievers, but they're not being challenged. So if a kid's not placed in gifted programming that is challenging, they might find other avenues. Like the boy said, I get in trouble because I get done early and I'm talking. And so that can be an issue. I find it's always interesting. We have kids who will come into our program, and the teachers that we talked to from before when they weren't in gifted programming are like, well, this student doesn't behave well, they blurt out, they misbehave all the time. We put them in gifted programming and challenge them, and we don't have those problems. Because they're being challenged, they're not bored, their needs are being met. And so it's important to try to meet the needs of those gifted children. The third myth I'm going to talk about gifted children is that they're good at everything. So you get that label gifted, and all of a sudden you can do macrame, amazing macrame, or cook things that will, like Emerald would be jealous of. But we know that that's not the case necessarily. So when gifted students start out earlier in their school career, studies have shown this, they do have a lot of knowledge and a lot of know-how that separates them from the pack, that makes them stand out, that makes them, appear as gifted. But what eventually happens is, as the years go by, is that eventually the other students start to catch up a little bit. And so these gifted students maybe don't know as much as they once did. And so what can happen is, as the academics become more difficult and they're challenged, what can happen with some gifted kids is that they don't like being challenged because they were used to being the one that was right all the time. And so instead, they want to not take any risks because they don't want to be wrong, or it's that perfectionism. But it's more than just perfectionism. It's just a matter of, they have this, there are teachers that will say, well, he'll know it, he's the smart one or whatever. And when you put that kind of pressure on a kid, they put that pressure on themselves. And so what can happen is they might start to struggle because they don't know what to do when they are challenged. We also know that there are some kids that are gifted in one area or more, but not all areas. So I'll give you an example of There are kids that will come into our math program that are really gifted in math, but they hate to write. They won't write. They don't like to read. That's another, we're not going to talk about that one, but the myth is that all gifted kids love to read, and that's not necessarily the case. On the converse side, we have students who are gifted in ELA who are not so hot at math. And so just because you're gifted doesn't mean you're gifted in everything. You are gifted in particular areas that you've been identified in. We just can't assume because they have that label that they are gifted across the board. And even kids who are gifted across the board, gifted in everything that we've tested them in, doesn't mean that they're not going to struggle, or it doesn't mean that they're great at everything that they do. The fourth myth is that gifted kids have trouble socially fitting in. Just like regular kids, gifted kids come in all shapes and sizes. A lot of times we imagine that gifted kid being the nerd, has the glasses, pocket, whatever, but he's kind of the nerd one. But we know that's not the case. That gifted kids have a spectrum of different types of kids, just like any group of kids. And so, there are plenty of gifted children that don't have any problem making friends at all. They're very social. Where this does become a problem, however, is that a gifted child, and this is really, James Delaware talks about this in his book, there's a difference between age mates and peer mates. So in school, we put kids into kindergarten about the age of 5 or 6, and every 5th and 6th grader is going to kindergarten, and then they're going up with their age mates. They're going to 1st grade, they're going to 2nd grade, and so on and so forth. However, these students may not be their peer mates. They may not be able to have conversations with them, or they might not be able to have, interactions with them that are meaningful to them. So while this group of kids over here are talking about dinosaurs and how cool they are, this kid is over here talking about the evolution of dinosaurs and how they, eventually turn into birds, and that's what he wants to talk about. And I see this all the time when I was teaching gifted. The gifted kids, or when I wasn't teaching gifted, the first couple years I was teaching, I wasn't in a gifted classroom, but gifted kids would, when I would see them on the playground, they would always want to talk to the adults. And the reason being is that this is a peer mate of theirs. This is someone they can have a conversation with. Like I said, since most children enter kindergarten, they're around 6 and go up together. If you're in a class full of 4th graders, you may have trouble finding a peer mate. So it's not that you're not socially fitting in. It's that you're not finding someone to fit in with who's your peer mate. And so that's kind of the difference between that. It's not like they're awkward or they're not able to function or talk to people. It's just that they don't have anything to talk with those people about. So they're not fitting in necessarily. All right. So the 5th myth is that gifted kids tend to be more mature than other kids their age. Now, you parents of gifted know this isn't necessarily always the case. So intellectually, gifted kids, yes, are more mature than kids their age, because that's the definition of gifted, is that they are able to handle, more academic or more learning than maybe your regular typical kid. That does not mean, and this is where I know we struggle with this one, like if we want to accelerate a kid or skip them a grade or whatever. We have a kid who's in 7th grade this year who's taking Algebra 2. And so I said to Mom, you know what, the parking lot, the high school is right next to the junior high. He could just walk over and take, Algebra 2 with kids. He's going to be in a class with juniors and seniors, but still. And Mom said something that was very profound to me. She said, you know what? I think he's ready academically to handle that, but I don't want him having conversations with people because they're conversing at a different level. Not intellectually, but maybe some of the content that they're talking about. Maybe something you don't want to expose your 7th grade child to. And so that's the problem, is that you may not want them to have those conversations quite yet, or hear those conversations. Emotionally, gifted kids are the age that's on their birth certificate. And so as a result, no matter how smart they appear to be, they are children. They throw fits. They, get mad when something doesn't go their way. And sometimes gifted kids can be even more so. They get mad when things don't go their way. And so, you want to make sure that you're treating them as children because that's what they are. So we shouldn't, just because a kid can talk to you as an adult doesn't mean you should treat them like an adult necessarily. The sixth myth is that gifted kids are always well behaved and compliant. And I hear this myth from teachers who don't teach gifted all the time. They're like, well, you have it easy. You have the good kids. And it's like, just come spend a day in my classroom, just one day, and I think you'll change your mind. Not that they're bad or anything like that, but they have challenges that are on another level, and their challenges may be different. So some gifted kids can come across as troublemakers. I'll never forget, I had a student by the name of Matt, and it was the third year I was teaching. The very first year I was teaching gifted, though. And whenever I brought something up, I was a social studies teacher. Whenever I brought something up, Matt always raised his hand and had a question. And then I'd answer that question, and he'd raise his hand and ask a follow-up question. And this would go on for 5-10 minutes. He would just ask question after question until he got the answers he was looking for. And sometimes I would just say, Matt, I don't know. That's something maybe we can look up together. Okay? But I knew that Matt was just intellectually curious. He wasn't trying to be disrespectful. He just was a curious kid. And so I went to a team meeting, and the English teacher was saying, you know what, Matt is always trying to make me look stupid in class. I'm like, oh, what's he doing? And she's like, he's always asking questions. And I'm like, well, why is that making you look stupid? She goes, well, he's only asking them because I don't know them. Like, no, that's not what he's doing. He's just intellectually curious. And so Matt came across to her as not being well behaved. But Matt eventually, when he grew up, he eventually went to Harvard. So he kind of gotten on the straight and narrow with that. But he found enough teachers that understood that he was not a bad behaved kid. He just was curious and he wanted to know things. But sometimes we can label it as that. Gifted kids' minds are designed to question things. That's how they're built. That's how they're wired. One of the biggest mistakes I feel I ever made with my 16-year-old daughter is when she was young, I always told her, never accept an answer. If I don't give you an answer, never accept that. Make sure you say why. Ask why. Ask further. And I taught that to her at a very young age. And now to this very day, I just can't give her an answer. I've got to give the why as well. And so, but she's just curious about it. And sometimes they can use this curiosity for the purposes of evil instead of good. They can drive a teacher nuts. Sometimes they do try to drive their teachers nuts. Sometimes they drive you nuts because you're asking a billion questions. But keep in mind, they're just intellectually curious. They just want to know. They just want to know. If a gifted child becomes bored, and we heard that in the video, what can happen a lot of times is that they don't have anything to do. And as the saying goes, idle hands. So when you don't have something to do, you're going to find things to do, and it may not be something that's constructive. Or you may not just be pulling out your book and reading. So sometimes, they might misbehave just because they're bored. The seventh gifted myth is that gifted kids are all self-directed. So if you put gifted kids into a room and give them an assignment, you could leave that room and come back a week later and it would be done. But we know that this is not the case. This is not true. This is just a myth. So there are skills that are natural to students, but there are other ones that have to be learned. Being self-directed is a learned attribute. It's not something you're born with. You're not born self-directed. You have to learn that. So you can be motivated, and that's different. So if you find a gifted kid that gets inspired by something or motivated by something, you have to get out of their way because they're just going to go full force into it. However, being self-directed is different, and this is why it's different. Self-directed is being motivated when you're not psyched about it or you're not really excited about it. That's self-directed, is that you have the discipline to say, you know what, not crazy about this, but I know I've got to do it, so I'm going to do it. That's self-directed. And a lot of gifted kids are not self-directed because they don't want to do things that they don't think are, important to them or things that are exciting. So being self-directed is a learned skill. And so some gifted kids have it, some do not. Some, have been able to get by for so long